After 14 years, the Cruis'n franchise is finally back on a Nintendo home console with the Nintendo Switch release of Cruis'n Blast. First released in arcades in early 2017, Cruis'n Blast's Switch announcement made this longtime fan of the series very happy. So how does a game like Cruis'n Blast hold up in 2021? Has the long wait been worth it? And how does Nintendo's somewhat underpowered hybrid console handle the arcade port? Stick around and we'll answer all those questions with my review of Cruis'n Blast on the Nintendo Switch. And real quick, if you're new here, make sure to subscribe so you can keep up with everything happening on the channel. And with that out of the way, let's get into it. So if you're new to the Cruis'n games and want to get all caught up, I highly suggest checking out my previous video on the series, which I'll leave a link to right here. But if you just want the short of it, the Cruis'n series was created by Eugene Jarvis of Midway Games, who first brought Cruis'n USA to arcades in 1994. USA was followed up by two arcade sequels with Cruis'n World and Cruis'n Exotica, all of which saw ports to the Nintendo 64. And while the original arcade trilogy were certainly the most notable games in the series, there were also a handful of Game Boy releases as well as 2007's Cruis'n on the Wii. The Arcade Racer series' signature hook is cruising through landmark and spectacle-filled locales while trying to place first to advance and upgrade your vehicle. It's a simple and straightforward formula with an emphasis on fun. And that's where Cruis'n Blast comes in. Developed by Raw Thrills, Eugene Jarvis's new company since leaving Midway, Blast mostly lives up to its name. Sure, USA and World may be more straightforward monikers for what to expect in their respective entries, but Blast really does feel like all the elements of the previous games turned up to 11, with a new Nitro Boost blast mechanic, and everything's neon for some reason. While you could say the arcade version of Blast is a somewhat stripped down Cruis'n experience with its slim selection of 5 tracks, the Switch port brings quite a bit more content to the table. Aside from the original arcade tracks, there's a new Cruis'n Tour mode split into 6 themed cups of 4 tracks each. These tracks do contain remixed elements of the arcade tracks, but there are some entirely new courses here, and the different themes do add a lot of variety to the mix. That's not to say everything is of the same quality though. While there are definitely quite a few memorable standout tracks, there are a few that seem to end abruptly or don't do much to stand out from the rest. Compared to something like Cruis'n World, this collection of tracks doesn't seem quite as distinct. The tour mode is broken up into 4 difficulties: easy, normal, hard, and extreme, which you'll have to unlock by getting gold medals in the previous cups. And the cup theme selections are perfectly ridiculous. Things start out fairly tame with the night tour where, you guessed it, it's night. There are a few added set piece elements here with fireworks or Chinese lanterns floating in the sky, but yeah, this is essentially night mode cup. Next is the Escape Tour, which takes 4 of the original arcade tracks and adds police car pursuit. While the police won't knock you out of the race or anything, they will try to slow you down and can definitely affect whether or not you place first in the race. Luckily, you can take them out, something you can actually do with any rival car, which gives you a Burnout-esque slow motion takedown animation. Next is the Storm Tour, which adds thunderstorms, typhoons, and snowstorms. Nothing that really directly affects any of the races, but this cup does contain one of my favorite new courses, Yeti Adrenaline, which has you racing up an icy mountain peak while giant Yeti fight above the course and punch holes in the ice, revealing a cavern underneath. Truly a sight to behold. Then there's the Chopper Tour, which adds military helicopters to the mix. The helicopters will take out traffic or blow up parts of the course as you blast through it, like a scene straight out of a Die Hard movie. There's nothing here that affects gameplay much either, but this cup is one of my favorites just for how over the top everything is. Next is the Dino Tour, which gives you a healthy smattering of dinosaurs across its 4 courses. And then finally the UFO Tour, an apocalyptic sci-fi cup filled with hostile flying saucers. It's a wacky and somewhat uneven selection of courses, but most of them are a ton of fun and they certainly beef up the track selection. As you complete races, you'll build up the XP of the car you're driving, collect cash, and find hidden keys, all which feeds into unlocking new rides and upgrading vehicles. Building up your XP not only increases your car's overall stats, but it also increases your level, which lets you unlock different cosmetic upgrades, gradually turning your car increasingly garish and awesome. The selection of 23 vehicles is true to proper Cruis'n form, with a variety of supercars, buses, classic cars, and incredibly outlandish options like a shark, a UFO, a dinosaur, and even a unicorn. Fans of the original arcade lineup of cars should note that a February 2020 update to Cruis'n Blast arcade units removed the 5 Lamborghini options due to a lapse in license. So of course that's the same here, with the replacement lineup of vehicles consisting of Corvette, Cadillac, Chevy, and Nissan options. When it comes to the gameplay, gameplay, fans of the original games will be right at home and newcomers will have no problem getting up to speed. Most of the time, it's all gas, no brakes, straight to the finish line, but there are a handful of mechanics that add to the arcade driving experience. You can perform a wheelie by double tapping the accelerator, allowing you to flip off of jumps or over traffic. You can also lean up on two wheels by double tapping the accelerator while turning, allowing you to barrel roll off of jumps. You can use a limited amount of nitro boost blasts each race by tapping the L button, and you can also drift by holding the R button while turning. Drifting for an extended amount of time will fill up your blast meter, which you can use for extra boosts of speed. As I made my way through the more difficult cups, using the extra blast from drifting became a necessity for keeping up with the pack. There are also blast pads scattered across each of the courses, and you'll want to hit as many of them as possible to give you the best chance of placing first. I enjoyed Blast the most when it melted into a chaotic, neon-smeared frenzy of last-minute nitro boosts, crossing the finish line just a hair ahead of the competition while dinosaurs trample by. I also appreciate that Raw Thrills included motion controls for steering as well. It doesn't replace the arcade wheel, but it's an enjoyable substitute. So, is it fun? Well, yeah, I think so. I came to Blast looking for a nostalgic return to the Cruis'n series, and I got just that and more. I really do enjoy the new drift mechanic, which is very reminiscent of Mario Kart. It adds an extra element to the race, and I appreciate the challenge of the higher difficulty cups. The courses are crazy and over the top, a perfect nostalgic homage to 90s arcade racers, but what I think Blast gets so right is the constant feeling of progression. Whether you're playing through an entire tour or just a single time trial race, you'll be building up XP and cash to use in your garage, which is shared by all the different game modes. It's also very easy to restart a race mid-tour if you're aiming for gold and don't want to have to play through the entire cup until you can try again. You'll still gain XP, cash, and the keys you collected, but you don't have to accept that 5th place ranking, allowing you to try for first place as many times as you like. There's a fairly large selection of vehicles here, all of which have their own individual stats, so Cruis'n Blast kind of turns into this awesome grind fest of playing through all the courses over and over again with different cars to unlock all their upgrades. The upgrades look awesome and feel worthwhile. Who doesn't want to play a race as a hammerhead shark with neon accents and a laser strapped to its head? I also really love the look of Blast. It just screams 90s arcade racer, and everything is absolutely drenched in shiny neon colors. It may not be the prettiest racer on the Nintendo Switch, but it's still very fun to look at. Cruis'n Blast also performs very well, hitting 60 frames per second both in docked and handheld mode, with resolutions of 1080p docked and 720p handheld. Split screen multiplayer also fares decently with a variable frame rate of 30 to 60 frames per second. The visuals are sharp and there's a great sense of speed throughout the entire experience. That's not to say everything's perfect here though, and there are a few things missing from the Switch port. Even though the game looks very bright and crisp, it seems like Raw Thrills had to remove some elements to maintain resolution and frame rate. Compared to the arcade version, the Switch port seems to have somewhat reduced level of detail, shadow quality is greatly reduced, making things look a bit flatter on the Switch version, and it's a small nitpick, but the front wheels of the cars don't appear to move when you steer. It's barely noticeable while you're playing, but I'm sure removing that detail had something to do with performance. There's also a few set pieces missing from the arcade tracks, like the burning tire fire in Death Valley, or the floats in the middle of the road in Rio de Janeiro. Sadly, just like in the Nintendo 64 Cruis'n ports, the ability to obliterate wildlife into an explosion of meat has also been removed from the Switch version of Blast. There also doesn't seem to be any oncoming traffic in any of the courses, and bumping into the back of cars can feel a little anticlimactic. For whatever reason, checkpoints have been removed from the Switch version as well. It doesn't change much, but it is a little awkward to not have the announcer regularly shouting, "Checkpoint!" as you complete each race. Stunts also filled up your blast meter in the arcade version, but in the Switch version, drifting is the only thing that does it. I have trouble believing those last two changes had anything to do with performance, so some of the tweaks here are a bit puzzling, but if this is what it took to get the game running at a solid 60 frames per second, I think those compromises were well worth it. The sound can also be a little hit or miss, with engine sounds and music being fairly quiet, and certain other sounds much higher in the mix. The theme song is incredibly catchy and some of the songs are standout, but I'd say overall the music isn't quite as memorable in Blast as with some of the previous games either. My biggest gripe with Blast though is its lack of online multiplayer. It just feels like a real missed opportunity, especially since there's such an emphasis on unlocking vehicles and cosmetic upgrades, which would be perfect for showing off to your friends. I'm not pretending to know how easy it is to add online to a game, but online multiplayer would do a lot for Cruis'n Blast replayability. Blast does feature local or split screen multiplayer though, and it's still a ton of fun. I got my wife to join me for some split-screen gameplay capture, which was only supposed to be for a few tracks, but we ended up playing together for hours, completely sucked into the loop of unlocking vehicles and upgrades. It was the most fun I've had with a racing game since burning through Cruis'n World on the Nintendo 64 at a friend's house back in the 90s. So even for some of its misses, I'm so happy to finally have Cruis'n Blast on the Nintendo Switch. As long as you take it for what it is, I think there's a lot of fun to be had for its $40 price tag, especially for those looking for a racer that throws it back to simpler times. I'm sure there will be those who will be harder on Cruis'n Blast than I've been, and that's okay. For me, after the few years we've had, this is exactly the cruising game I want right now. A dumb, mindless arcade racer that's more fun than it has any business being. Let me know if you're planning on picking up Cruis'n Blast down in the comments. Hopefully it sells well enough to warrant a Switch collection of the original arcade trilogy, something that's been teased recently by series creator Eugene Jarvis. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a like on your way out and also consider subscribing. And until the next video, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.